I'm Emily Davis, 28 years old, and up until a month ago, I truly believed I had everything a woman could ever want. I lived in a cozy little house in Denver, Colorado, nestled in a quiet neighborhood with a yard big enough for a dog, which Mark and I had always talked about getting. Mark was my fiancé, and we'd been together since I was 18 and he was 19, practically kids fresh out of high school. We went through so much together navigating college, finding our first real jobs, even struggling through those early years when every penny counted. He was my rock, my best friend, the person I imagined spending every single day with until we were old and gray, sharing stories from our long lives. Our wedding was set for next spring, and I had a whole Pinterest board filled with ideas, from the wildflower bouquets to the perfect shade of dusty rose for the bridesmaids' dresses. Life was, in a word, perfect, or so I thought. My job in engineering, specifically in project management, often means I work with a lot of different teams. When our department expanded back in March, we brought in a handful of new faces. One of them was Jessica. She was sharp, quick-witted, and had a dry sense of humor that I appreciated. She worked in the structural design team, so our paths crossed pretty regularly on joint projects. We started chatting casually, talking about work, then about life outside of it. It wasn't long before she asked about my personal life, specifically if I was seeing anyone and how long we'd been together. I remember thinking it was a bit forward for a new coworker, but I brushed it off. People are curious, right? I told her about Mark, how long we'd been together, how we were engaged. She just nodded, a strange expression flitting across her face that I couldn't quite place at the time. I didn't give it a second thought. I just used Mark's first name when talking to colleagues, so it's not like she knew his last name or anything that could specifically identify him. Then came our annual summer night out in early June. Our company always throws a big party, a summer one and a Christmas one. This year, it was at a swanky rooftop bar downtown. Mark was going to pick me up later, since a few of us planned on staying out late and missing the last light rail. As the night wound down and it was just a small group of us left, I turned to Jessica. "Hey," I said, "Mark's coming to pick me up. Do you need a ride? We can drop you off." Her face, usually so composed, crumpled slightly. Her eyes met mine and there was a flicker of something in them, pity, regret, I couldn't tell. Then she said in a voice barely above a whisper, "That can't happen, Emily. We need to talk about why." My heart did a strange little skip. What on earth was she talking about? But before I could press her, one of our other colleagues, Tom, clapped me on the shoulder, laughing about something. The moment passed. Mark arrived shortly after, and with Tom and another coworker in the car, the conversation stayed light and about the party. I kept glancing at Jessica in the rearview mirror, trying to decipher her strange comment, but she just stared out the window, looking miles away. The uneasy feeling settled deep in my stomach, a persistent knot that wouldn't unravel. The next week at the office, the knot tightened. Jessica sent me a message on Teams during lunch. "What are you doing for lunch?" she asked. Again, it was odd. We usually ate with our respective teams, the project managers together, the designers together. "Nothing specific," I replied, a sense of dread beginning to prickle at the edges of my calm. "Why?" she quickly responded. "Let's go to that little cafe a few streets away from the office, just us." My mind raced. This had to be it. This was about her comment the other night. I met her near the main reception of our building. Jessica wasn't her usual jovial self. Her face was serious, almost somber. We walked to the cafe, the silence between us heavy and charged with unspoken words. Every step felt like walking towards an unknown precipice. My mind raced, conjuring every possible scenario. Was she going to confess she was leaving the company? Was she in some kind of trouble? None of my guesses even came close to the shattering truth that was about to unleash itself. Once we were settled at a small, unassuming table in the corner of the cafe, far from any prying ears, Jessica took a deep breath. She didn't beat around the bush. Her voice was low, steady, but laced with a clear sadness. "Emily," she began, her gaze unwavering, "I need to tell you something. It's about Mark." My blood ran cold. "What about Mark?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely audible. She then proceeded to lay out a story that ripped my world apart, piece by agonizing piece. She told me she had been with Mark. Not a casual acquaintance, not a brief fling, but a full-blown relationship. It started years ago when Mark went to a bachelor party in Las Vegas. He was 23 and I was 22, still navigating the early years of our relationship, full of youthful optimism and blind trust. Jessica was there too, apparently, part of the extended group. She said they spent most of the holiday together. And then, the kicker, there were pictures. Pictures I had never seen, of course. Pictures of them laughing, of them too close, too intimate for casual friends. pictures that screamed betrayal. But it didn't end there. She went on to explain that they had gotten back together, or rather, continued their affair, about 6 or 7 months after the Vegas trip. For roughly another 6 months, they were seeing each other, sometimes as a secret couple, sometimes as friends with benefits. She said it started because Mark had told her he was leaving me. He had asked to meet her, claiming he was finally ready to end things with me. This never happened. Not once had Mark ever given me any indication that he was having second thoughts. Our life together was progressing, moving towards the future we had meticulously planned. While they were playing house, I was working full-time, building my career, supporting us. Jessica showed me texts, time-stamped messages, confirming their meetings, all happening during my working hours, or when I was at my weekly book club or visiting my family out of state. The one that twisted the knife deepest was a specific memory, a particularly painful one from a few years back. It was the day of a massive client presentation, the biggest project I had worked on in my career at that point. I had poured hundreds of hours into it, and I was so nervous, but also incredibly excited. Mark had told me he couldn't be there for support because he had come down with a terrible stomach bug. He sounded so convincing on the phone, weak and miserable. I felt terrible for him, even more so because I was going to be presenting alone. I powered through it, gave the presentation of my life, even though I wished he was there. Jessica then pulled up a photo on her phone, a picture of Mark, looking perfectly healthy, beaming, feeding ducks by the lake at City Park, a popular spot right here in Denver. The timestamp was a mere hour into my presentation. He hadn't been sick, he had been with her. The memory of feeling alone and unsupported, only to now know it was a deliberate lie, truly broke me. Every word Jessica spoke was backed up. Messages, photos, even flight itineraries for their Vegas trip. It was indisputable. My mind was reeling, trying to process the sheer scale of the deception. And then, she dropped another bomb. Mark's friends knew. The photos from Vegas had some of his closest friends in them, laughing, seemingly oblivious or worse, complicit. These were people I had known for years, people I had shared countless dinners and holidays with. Some of them had even been at our engagement party. My entire world, built on a foundation of trust and shared history, was crumbling around me. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me, leaving me suspended in a terrifying, empty void. The betrayal wasn't just Mark's. It was a collective, silent conspiracy that had been playing out right under my nose for years. The air in the cafe felt thick, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. My perfect life, my perfect love, was a carefully constructed lie. And I had just swallowed it whole. The hum of Denver was a constant backdrop to my life, a comforting lullaby I'd grown up with. I'm Emily, 28 years old, and for as long as I could remember, my world had been neatly compartmentalized. My job as a structural engineer, my cozy apartment, and him, Mark. Mark and I had been together since high school, a storybook romance in the making. We navigated the awkward years of braces and bad haircuts, survived the long-distance trials of college, and finally, after 10 years, we were engaged. Our lives were intertwined, a tapestry woven with shared memories, inside jokes, and dreams of a future that felt as solid and predictable as the mountain range framing our city. We were planning our wedding, debating between a summer ceremony in the Rockies or a more intimate affair in a downtown loft. Every detail felt like a brick in the foundation of our shared life, meticulously placed, building towards something beautiful and unbreakable. My work kept me busy, which I liked. The precision of engineering, the challenge of bringing a design to life, it all appealed to my methodical nature. Our team had recently expanded, bringing in a handful of new faces, which was usually a welcome change. It meant fresh perspectives, new ideas, and sometimes, just new people to grab coffee with. One of those new faces was James. He was in the electrical department, which meant our paths would cross often on projects. He had a friendly, easygoing vibe, the kind of person who could make you laugh even when you were drowning in blueprints. We'd chat about work, about life, and somehow, we discovered we had mutual acquaintances from back home, which always made the world feel a little smaller, a little more connected. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know everyone, and one day he asked about my relationship. "So, you seeing anyone?" he'd asked, and I'd proudly shared, "Engaged, actually. Been with him forever." He asked a few more questions, how long, how we met, and at the time, I thought it was a bit quick to dive into personal questions, but I brushed it off. Just a friendly guy, I figured. I never really mentioned his full name to Mark, just a new guy at work, keeping things simple as I often did. The company summer night out rolled around in early June. These events were always a bit chaotic but fun. A chance to let loose, bond with colleagues outside the confines of the office. Mark wasn't there, and I was enjoying myself, catching up with people, laughing at bad jokes. As the night wound down and the last trains had long gone, I was coordinating a ride home. Mark was going to pick me up. I saw James standing alone, looking a bit lost, and offered him a lift. "Hey James, need a ride, Mark's on his way." His response stopped me cold. "That can't happen, and we need to talk about why." The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was he in some kind of trouble? Had I offended him? But before I could press him, a few other workmates joined us, and the conversation shifted. I didn't bring it up in the car. It felt too personal to discuss with others present, and I figured I'd get an explanation later. A knot of unease began to form in my stomach. The following week, back in the office, a message popped up on my team's chat. It was James, asking what I was doing for lunch. Another oddity. We usually ate with our respective teams. I usually joined the other structural engineers, and he'd be with the electrical guys. He then suggested a small cafe a few streets away from the office, a place I'd never been to. My curiosity was piqued, and the knot in my stomach tightened. I met him near the main reception. He wasn't his usual jovial self. His face was serious, almost somber. We walked to the cafe mostly in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. By the time we sat down at a quiet table, I knew something big was coming. The pit in my stomach had grown into a full-blown cavern. He took a deep breath, looking at his hands for a moment before meeting my gaze. "Emily," he started, his voice barely above a whisper, I was with your fiancé for a while." The words hit me like a physical blow. My head reeled. My fiancé, Mark, it couldn't be. My mind immediately went to some misunderstanding, some elaborate prank. But James's face was earnest, pained even. He explained that a few years ago, when Mark was 22, he'd gone to Ibiza with friends. And apparently he and James had spent most of that holiday together. He even had pictures to prove it, none of which I'd ever seen. Pictures of them together, laughing, exploring. My world, once so stable, began to tilt. But it got worse, much, much worse. He then revealed that they had rekindled things after the turn of the year, about 6 or 7 months after the Ibiza trip. They were together, or at least friends with benefits, for another 6 months roughly. This, he explained, started because Mark had told James he was leaving me. He'd asked to meet, apparently. This had never happened. Not a single word, not a hint of it. At that point, I had finished university and was working full-time. They both hadn't. James could tell by the timestamps on their texts that their interactions often happened during my working hours, or when I was away supporting my football team or playing for the Sunday league team I was part of. The pain was a dull throb that quickly sharpened into a searing agony. He told me about one specific day that shattered me completely. We were playing in a regional semi-cup final, a huge game for my team. I remembered Mark telling me he was working that Saturday, that he couldn't change shifts, and so he couldn't make the 12 p.m. kickoff. I had been disappointed, but I understood. Now James was telling me that was a complete lie. That day, they were on a day out at Loch Lomond. Loch Lomond. There was even a picture of Mark feeding ducks, time-stamped 1:11 p.m., which was roughly 10 minutes into the second half of my game. While I was fighting for a win on the field, missing him in the stands, he was laughing with another man, living a double life. It hurt so much back then that he couldn't make it when all the other partners were there. Now I couldn't even comprehend it. Everything James said, every sickening detail was indisputable. He had messages, images, concrete proof. And the final blow, her friends knew, at least about Ibiza. They were in some of the pictures with Mark and James. These were people I had known for nearly 20 years. Friends I had shared countless milestones with. One of them, Sarah, whose kids called me Aunt Emily, who I often looked after when I worked from home. The thought of them knowing, of them watching me, comforting me, while keeping this secret, twisted the knife deeper. Now, a month had passed since that lunch, a month of living with this agonizing secret. We were supposed to go on holiday at the start of next week. Mark and I, the thought of it made me nauseous. How could I pretend? How could I sit across from him, knowing? I felt like I was unraveling, piece by agonizing piece. I was looking into therapy, but I knew I needed to deal with this, just me first. I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, about to have a meltdown, just like that movie where Michael Douglas loses it. If I didn't get this out to someone, anyone other than James, in a week, I was going to implode. The confrontation was coming, a storm brewing on the horizon, and I had no idea what kind of wreckage it would leave behind. The Denver skyline always looked best at sunset, bathed in a fiery orange glow that bled into soft purples. I remember standing on my balcony, a glass of Pinot Noir in hand, watching it with Mark beside me. We'd bought this condo, our first real adult purchase together, just a year ago. It felt like the culmination of everything we'd built since high school. I'm Emily Davis, 28, and for as long as I could remember, Mark was my constant. My rock, my future. We'd been together since I was 18 and he was 19, navigated college, job hunts, and the awkward transition into real adulthood, all hand in hand. He was the kind of steady, reliable presence that made me feel safe, secure. I was an architect, thriving in a demanding but rewarding career, meticulously designing spaces that were both beautiful and functional. My life, much like my blueprints, felt perfectly aligned. Then James walked into our office. He joined our firm in March, part of a big expansion that brought in a lot of new talent. He was in the structural engineering department, so our paths crossed constantly on projects. He had an easy laugh and a quick wit, and he quickly became one of those friendly faces you looked forward to seeing around the water cooler. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know everyone, and I appreciated that. One afternoon, while we were hashing out some details for a new commercial build, he casually asked about my personal life. "You seeing anyone, Emily?" he'd asked, leaning back in his chair with a relaxed smile. I'd laughed, engaged, actually. "Mark and I have been together forever." He just nodded, a small, unreadable expression flitting across his face before he'd moved on to talk about his own dating woes. It felt a little quick to dive into that topic, but I shrugged it off. People are curious, right? Summer rolled around and our firm threw its annual summer party. It was a big deal, held at a swanky rooftop bar downtown. Mark couldn't make it, had some last-minute work thing pop up, which was a shame but not unusual. He was always dedicated to his job. I was having a good time, chatting with colleagues, enjoying the warm night air. As the evening wound down, a few of us realized we'd missed the last light rail back. I was about to call an Uber when James walked up. "Need a ride, Emily?" he offered, gesturing to his car keys. I was about to say yes when he stopped me. "Actually, maybe we should talk about why that can't happen," he said, his usual lighthearted tone replaced by something somber, almost strained. It caught me off guard, and before I could press him, my friend Sarah was calling my name, ready to share an Uber. The moment passed, leaving me with a strange knot of confusion in my stomach. I dismissed it as James being quirky, but the oddness lingered. The following week, James messaged me on Teams. "Lunch today, there's a great little cafe a few blocks away I want to try." It was out of character. Usually the engineers stuck with their own team for lunch and I ate with the architects. Still, I figured he was just trying to be friendly. I agreed. When I met him in the main lobby, he wasn't his usual jokey self. He seemed heavy. His shoulders were slumped and his eyes had a haunted look. We walked to the cafe in silence, the quiet between us thick with unspoken tension. By the time we sat down at a small corner table, I knew something serious was coming. "Emily," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I have something I need to tell you. It's about Mark." My heart lurched. My first thought was an accident, a family emergency, anything but this. He took a deep breath. "Mark and we were together." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. My mind scrambled, trying to make sense of it. Together, how, when, my fiancé, my Mark. He started to recount a story that ripped my perfectly aligned world to shreds. Mark had met James 5 years ago in Ibiza. Mark was on a trip with his college friends, and James was there for a bachelor party. They'd spent most of the holiday together, and James had pictures. Pictures I'd never seen, of course. Mark laughing with James on a boat, arms slung around each other at some beach club, their faces flushed from the sun and whatever else. My Mark, my steady, reliable Mark, was a stranger in those photos, but it didn't end there. James continued, his voice monotone, like he was reciting a painful script. 6 or 7 months after Ibiza, after Mark and I were already engaged, they'd reconnected. Mark had supposedly told James he was going to leave me, that he wanted to be with James. And for roughly 6 months, they were together again. Not just casual. He called it friends with benefits. But the way he said it, the pain in his eyes, told me it was more for him. This whole time, Mark had never even hinted at wanting to leave me. He'd been planning our wedding, talking about kids, picking out paint swatches for the nursery that didn't even exist yet. The timeline James laid out was sickeningly precise. He showed me texts, screen grabs of calls. Most of them were from my working hours, or when I was out with my book club, or at my weekly yoga class. The dates, the times, they all matched up perfectly with moments Mark had claimed to be busy with work or out with his friends. The world spun. Then he told me about my grandmother's 80th birthday. It was a huge celebration, a big family reunion in Aspen. Mark had promised for months he'd be there. 3 days before, he'd told me his boss had sprung a mandatory all-day conference on him. He said he was so sorry, but he couldn't possibly miss it. I was disappointed, but I understood. Work was important. I went to Aspen alone, feeling a little deflated but still celebrating with my family. James pulled out his phone. "This one," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "This is from that day." It was a picture of Mark and him, smiling, standing in front of a giant, snow-capped peak. A timestamp in the corner read 1:30 p.m. The same day, the same time, I was raising a glass of champagne to my grandmother, explaining for the 10th time why Mark wasn't there. There was also a short video, grainy but clear enough. Mark giggling, throwing a snowball at James. They looked carefree, happy, betrayed. That's how I felt. Utterly, completely betrayed, not just by Mark but by the universe itself. James looked at me, his eyes full of a sorrow that mirrored my own. "Her friends knew Emily," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "About Ibiza, at least. They were in some of the pictures. Her friends. The ones I'd known since childhood. The ones who came to my bridal shower, who helped me pick out my wedding dress. Sarah, my best friend, who'd been with me through thick and thin. How could they have known and said nothing?" The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. These were people I trusted, people I considered family. Sarah's kids called me Aunt Emily. I felt like the ground beneath my feet had vanished. My life, meticulously built, carefully planned, was nothing but a house of cards collapsing around me. The cafe, the friendly chatter of other diners, the scent of coffee, all faded into a blurry, distorted mess. I could barely breathe. We were supposed to go on a romantic getaway to the Caribbean next week, a pre-wedding trip. The thought of it now, of spending a week in paradise with a man who had systematically lied to me for years, who had built our entire relationship on a foundation of deceit, made me want to throw up. I sat there numb, as James explained he'd tried to tell me sooner. He felt guilty, had seen how happy I seemed, and couldn't keep the secret anymore. He said he'd only joined our company to be close to Mark, hoping to rekindle whatever they had, but had since realized it was a mistake, and that he couldn't live with the lie. He even said Mark was talking about leaving me just before he got this job at our firm, but that once he realized James was going to be his colleague, Mark had backed off and said he was committed to me and the wedding. So Mark had known James was joining, known the risk, and still gone ahead with our wedding plans, continuing the charade. I don't remember walking back to the office or even getting home. The world felt muffled, distant. All I could hear were James's words, replaying like a broken record. Mark, Ibiza, friends, lies. I stared at the engagement ring on my finger, a beautiful diamond that suddenly felt like a heavy, meaningless weight. It was supposed to symbolize forever, a promise of a shared future. Now it was just a stark reminder of a monumental betrayal. The anger hadn't fully set in yet, just a crushing, suffocating disbelief. I felt like I was watching a movie of my own life, but it was a tragedy, and I was the unsuspecting protagonist. My perfect world had shattered into a million irreparable pieces, and I had no idea how to put them back together. The silence in my condo was deafening, amplified by the storm raging inside my head. The betrayal was so complete, so total, that I felt utterly lost. The thought of confronting him, of even looking at him, filled me with a primal fear. But I knew I had to, sooner rather than later. The thought of holding this devastating secret, of letting it fester, was even worse. My meticulously planned life had become a disaster zone, and I was standing right in the middle of it, paralyzed. The sunset over Denver, once a symbol of peace, now mocked me with its vibrant, deceptive beauty. It was a beautiful lie, just like everything else. My stomach churned. I felt like Michael Douglas in Falling Down, on the verge of imploding. If I didn't get this out, if I didn't act, I was going to crack. Denver had always been home. The mountains were a constant, comforting presence, and the city hummed with a rhythm I knew by heart. I'm Emily Davis, 28 years old, and my life, until recently, had felt like a perfectly orchestrated symphony. For 10 years, Mark had been the conductor. We met in college, two wide-eyed kids navigating a new city, and our love story felt like something out of a romantic comedy. We'd been through everything together: late-night study sessions fueled by bad coffee, the clumsy first attempts at adulting, the joy of landing our first real jobs. He was my rock, my confidant, my future. Our engagement ring, a simple platinum band with a single, brilliant-cut diamond, sat on my finger like a promise carved in stone. We had just celebrated our 10th anniversary as a couple, and our wedding was planned for next spring. Every detail, from the floral arrangements to the playlist for the reception, felt like a joint creation, a testament to our shared dreams. My job as a project manager at a mechanical engineering firm kept me busy, but it was a good kind of busy. I thrived on the organized chaos of deadlines and deliverables. It was rewarding, and it allowed me to build a life with Mark that we both envisioned. We had just bought our first house, a charming bungalow with a big backyard that we dreamed of filling with laughter and maybe a dog or two. Everything was falling into place. Then came James. He joined our team in March, a new face among the familiar ones. He was brought on to handle the electrical side of our projects, meaning our paths crossed constantly. He was easygoing, quick with a joke, and had that kind of friendly demeanor that made everyone feel at ease. We started talking during coffee breaks, discussing work, then moving on to shared interests. He mentioned he knew a few people from my hometown, which was a small world kind of moment, and I told him the same. Small talk, nothing more. One afternoon, James asked about my relationship. "So, you seeing anyone?" he'd asked, leaning back in his chair, a casual smile on his face. "How long you been together?" I remember thinking it was a bit direct, a little too personal for someone I'd just started working with, but I brushed it off. Maybe it was just his way. I proudly told him about Mark, our 10 years together, the engagement, the whole happy story. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? Mark and I were solid, we were us. I didn't even mention James by name to Mark, just that there was a new guy, a new electrical engineer on the team. I just used first names for most work colleagues, and Mark didn't press for more details. The first week of June, the company hosted its annual summer night out. It was a big deal, a chance for everyone to let loose and bond outside the office. The night was a blur of laughter, cheap drinks, and terrible karaoke. Mark was supposed to pick me up from downtown later, as the remaining few of us had missed the last train. As I was getting ready to leave, I saw James heading out too. "Hey James," I called out, "Mark S. picking me up, want a lift?" He stopped, and his usual cheerful expression dimmed. He looked hesitant. "No, I can't," he said, his voice lower than usual. "We need to talk about why." I was taken aback. "About why?" I repeated, confused. What on earth could he mean? But before I could press him, Mark pulled up, and two of my other coworkers piled into the back seat, ready to be dropped off. The car ride was filled with their chatter, and the moment passed. I decided to ask James about it on Monday. It felt strange, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit, but I pushed it to the back of my mind. The next few days were a whirlwind, and the conversation with James slipped my thoughts. The following week, the Friday after the night out, I was swamped with reports. My phone buzzed. It was James, a message on Teams. "What are you doing for lunch?" he asked. Again, it felt a little out of place. I usually ate with the other project managers, and he typically joined the electrical team. But then he followed up, "There's a little cafe a few streets away. I hear it's good." Curiosity and a tiny bit of lingering confusion from his comment the other night got the better of me. "Okay," I typed back. "Meet you at reception." I saw him waiting, standing a little straighter than usual. His smile was gone, replaced by a serious, almost somber expression. He wasn't joking, wasn't his usual lighthearted self. We walked in silence, the usual hum of downtown Denver feeling oddly muted around us. My stomach churned with a sudden sense of dread. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. We sat down at a small table in the corner of the cafe, the clatter of dishes and murmur of other conversations fading into the background. James looked at me, his gaze steady, and said, "Emily, I need to tell you something, it's about Mark." My breath hitched. "What about Mark?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He started. "About 5 years ago, Mark went to Ibiza with his friends. You were 23, right?" My mind raced back. Yes, that summer, he'd gone with his buddies. I'd stayed home, working on a big project for my firm. "Yes," I confirmed, my heart pounding. "He spent most of that holiday with your partner," James continued, his voice gentle, almost regretful. "There are pictures, I have them." My head spun. My partner, but Mark was my partner, the words weren't making sense. "My partner," I managed to stammer, then it hit me. He wasn't saying my partner in the present tense. He was saying his partner, and that's when the world tilted on its axis. He meant Mark, my fiancé, my Mark. "And it didn't stop there," James went on, oblivious to the earthquake happening inside me. "They got back together sort of 6 or 7 months after Ibiza. It was on and off for another 6 months. Friends with benefits mostly, but he said she was leaving you. He said she asked to meet him again." My vision blurred. Leaving me, Mark? This couldn't be real. This was a nightmare. I'd never had an inkling, not a single hint. I remembered that time. I was working full-time, building my career, while Mark was finishing up his degree. James continued, "From the times on the texts, it looks like it was mostly when you were at work, or when you were away at football games or with your Sunday league team." The air was thick, suffocating. My mind flashed back to every little moment, every unanswered call, every time he'd been busy. And then the ultimate betrayal. There's one that really stuck with me, James said, his voice laced with an unexpected sadness. You remember that regional semi-cup final, the one where he said he had to work, couldn't get a shift change? My blood ran cold. Of course I remembered. I'd been so disappointed. All the other wives and girlfriends were there, cheering on their partners. I'd sat in the stands alone, trying to look enthusiastic but feeling a pang of loneliness. He wasn't working, Emily. He was on a day out at Loch Lomond with her. There's even a picture, her feeding ducks. Time-stamped one, 11 p.m. You were 10 minutes into the second half. The image of that day, the pang of hurt I'd felt then, flooded back, amplified 1,000 times by this horrifying revelation. I could barely breathe. My Mark, had lied to me. He had been with another woman not just once but repeatedly. And the timing. While I was supporting his passion, he was betraying me. It was a gut punch that left me winded. Everything I've told you, James finished, his voice flat, it's all backed up. Messages, pictures, I wouldn't have told you if I didn't have proof. I just sat there numb. The cafe faded, the sounds of conversation dissolved into a roaring in my ears. The betrayal, the sheer audacity of it, was a physical weight pressing down on me. And then another layer of ice descended. Her friends knew Emily, James added, his voice barely audible. They're in some of the Ibiza pictures. People you've known for nearly 20 years. One of them you look after her kids, they call you Aunt Emily. The realization crashed over me, shattering any remaining semblance of my world. My friends, my extended family, people I trusted implicitly had known. They had watched me, smiled at me, let me care for their children, all while knowing about Mark's infidelity. It was a deeper cut, a betrayal that felt even more insidious than Mark's. We were supposed to go on holiday next week. A romantic getaway to celebrate our anniversary, a week of sun and relaxation that now felt like a cruel joke. How could I face him? How could I pretend? My mind was a chaotic mess of anger, disbelief, and profound sorrow. I felt like I was about to crack, like everything I had built, everything I believed in, was about to crumble into dust. Therapy, yes, I needed therapy. But first, I needed to process this alone, to somehow make sense of this new, terrifying reality. I'd known for a month now, since James first approached me, and I was still adrift, unable to navigate the stormy waters of my own emotions. I felt like Michael Douglas in Falling Down, on the verge of imploding, about to explode with a rage I didn't know I possessed. If I didn't get this out to someone, anyone, within the next week, I was certain I would drown in it. My perfectly orchestrated symphony had become a discordant, screaming nightmare. The air in the small coffee shop was thick with unspoken words, a tension so palpable you could almost taste it. Across from me sat Sarah and Jess, two women I'd known since elementary school, friends who had shared my deepest secrets, my silliest dreams, and now, my most profound betrayal. I was Emily Davis, and at 28, living in Denver, Colorado, I was learning just how much a heart could hold before it shattered, and how much it could mend after. So you knew, I stated, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands that I tried to hide beneath the table. The words hung in the air, accusation and sorrow intertwined. Sarah, ever the softer of the two, looked away, her eyes fixed on a distant point outside the window. Emily, it was. We didn't know the full extent. Not at first, the Ibiza trip. It seemed like a fling, he said it was over. I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping me. Mark, the man who was supposed to be my fiancé, the man I was building a life with, I leaned forward, my gaze piercing. You saw them, you were there, you watched him feed her ducks, for crying out loud, while I was missing a semi-cup final because she had to work. The anger, a slow burn for weeks, was finally igniting. And then when it wasn't over, when they picked back up again months later, when she told him she was going to leave me, did you say anything then? Did you even consider that your silence was complicity? Jess, usually the more outspoken, was unusually quiet. Her face was pale, her usual vibrant energy completely absent. We were caught, Em. She swore it was just a rebound, a mistake. She said she loved you, that she was going to tell you, but she was scared. We believed her. You believed a lie that protected your own comfort, I countered, my voice rising slightly. Heads at other tables turned, but I didn't care. This wasn't for them, this was for me. You watched me plan our wedding, you listened to me talk about our future, you saw me pick out colors and flowers, and all the while you knew he was seeing someone else. You knew it was Mark, my Mark, who was having a secret life, and you kept it from me. You let me live a lie. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. We are so sorry, Emily. We didn't know how to tell you, we were afraid of hurting you, of breaking up the group. You've broken more than a group, I said, the words heavy with pain. You've broken trust, you've broken years of friendship. I thought you were my sisters, and you let me walk into this blind. Jess finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. What do you want us to do, Em? How can we fix this? You can't fix it, I told them, shaking my head. The truth of that hit me with a fresh wave of grief. Some things once shattered could never be fully pieced back together. But you can own it. And you can tell everyone, not just our mutual friends but anyone who asks. You can tell them exactly why Mark and I are no longer together. You can tell them what kind of man he is and what kind of friends you were. Their eyes widened. This was the part where their comfortable silence ended. This was where the consequences of their inaction truly began to ripple out. Mark had told me I could air it out, that he understood. I wouldn't do it directly, not an vengeful public spectacle. But I could empower the truth to spread through those who had a direct connection to the betrayal. This wasn't about destroying Mark's life. It was about protecting my own, about ensuring that my narrative wasn't silenced by his deceit or their complicity. I stood up then, the conversation at an end. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, and I don't think I can offer mine, not yet, but I'm asking you to be honest, for once. I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving them sitting there, two figures shrinking in the wake of their own choices. The air outside felt cleaner, the Denver sky a brilliant, unforgiving blue. A heavy weight had lifted from my chest, replaced by a sense of clarity. This wasn't the same kind of anger as before. It was the quiet, steely resolve of someone who had faced the worst and decided to emerge stronger. The legal process for the house was moving swiftly. The equity, as Mark had said, was significant. My solicitor, a no-nonsense woman with kind eyes, assured me I'd be in a strong financial position. It wasn't the dream home Mark and I had envisioned, but it would be a fresh start, a foundation built on my own terms. I was staying in a friend's spare room for now, the kindness of truly supportive friends a stark contrast to the betrayal I'd just confronted. Jamie, my coworker, had offered her spare room too, but it was too far from my established life, a reminder of the origins of this whole mess. Each morning, I woke up a little lighter. The meltdowns, the Michael Douglas falling down moments, were less frequent. Therapy was helping, providing a safe space to unravel the tangled knots of emotion. I was learning to process the grief, not just for the relationship but for the loss of trust, the shattering of a carefully constructed future. One evening, as I scrolled through my phone, I saw a casual post from a mutual acquaintance, a picture of Mark at a social gathering, looking a little too jovial. The comments were sparse, not the usual outpouring of well wishes. Then, a few days later, another post, a subtle dig about someone's recent relationship drama. It wasn't direct, but the whispers had begun. Sarah and Jess, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of a desperate need to cleanse themselves, had clearly started talking. The truth, once a carefully guarded secret, was now out in the open. My revenge wasn't a grand, destructive act. It was far more potent. It was rebuilding my life, piece by painful piece, into something authentic and strong. It was knowing that while Mark might try to move on, his reputation, his character, would forever be tainted by the choices he'd made. He had admitted he deserved whatever happened. Well, this was it. The quiet spread of truth, the knowing glances, the subtle shifts in social dynamics. He wouldn't be able to escape the shadow of his actions. As for me, Emily Davis, I was learning to breathe again. I wasn't looking for dating apps yet, that would come in time. For now, my focus was on myself, on healing, on rediscovering the person I was before the lies clouded my vision. The pain hadn't vanished entirely, but it no longer consumed me. It was a scar, a reminder of what I had survived, and a testament to the strength I never knew I possessed. The future was unwritten, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was truly mine to write.